Please rise for invocation, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. I should say silent invocation.
Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Will the clerk call the roll?
Here.
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 Here. Here.
That was great.
Item 4, only one item on the agenda, but I've got a feeling it's a doozy. General fund budget discussion. Mr. Manager?
You're going to get a presentation from Dr. Niels first. Jamie will come in and do a little bit on the $15 an hour minimum wage, and then Dr. Niels will complete that afterwards. I'm going to turn it over to him to begin the presentation at this point.
Mayor and Council, good afternoon. This is the start of our most fun and favorite time of the year, the budget session. So first of all, I'd like to give a big thanks to Lupe, our budget manager, to Cynthia, our accounting manager, to Linda, the assistant finance director, and all of the accounting and finance team. Without their help, we could not do this. And so I really appreciate their support and all that they do to make sure that you get the best information possible. So as the city manager had mentioned, this is the general fund workshop, and to give you an overview of what's going to happen over the next few months. In June, you may recall, we get the CIP review and a preliminary property values, and interestingly enough, about 15 minutes ago I did get the preliminary numbers, so we'll be able to show you what they are. In July then, the final property values on July 1st, the all funds budget reviews, set the max millage, set the budget hearing dates. In August, you adopt the CIP in concept. And finally, in September, the budget hearings. There's 2 of them. And budget hearings will also have public sessions on those. And then finally, the budget adoption by the 30th of the month. Any questions on what's coming up? Okay. So as the city manager had indicated, we're going to go through the financial results for FY21 through April, preliminary general fund forecast, and then I'll turn it over to Jamie for a discussion on the compensation issues. And I'll come back with a general fund balance and policy recommendations, and also then an overview of ARPA, the American Rescue Plan Act of 21. Just as a refresher for all that are viewing this, Council knows, but the goals, as the Council set out, are public safety, infrastructure, quality of life, economic development, fiscal sustainability, and organizational elegance. Excellence could be elegance too.
We could do it for elegance.
As we try to incorporate all of our activities, we try to identify each one of these goals that's important, particularly in the CIP. And I think this year you'll see a little better focus on which projects fall in which of those categories. So this slide is a combination of looking at what happened in FY20 and also compared to FY21. If you can see in FY21, we are ahead of where we were in FY20 in almost every category, at least the major categories. We can see that the original budget was $40.6 million. With amendments is $41.5 million. This year our original budget was $43,100,000 and amended as $44,283, and we'll talk a little bit more about those amendments later on. Any questions on that slide? Okay. The next slide, this is a breakdown of the taxes category on the previous slide. So you can see that our excuse me, ad valorem taxes last year were about 94.8% collected as of April. This year we've collected almost all of our budget of 99.67, so we're ahead there, which is quite helpful. And the utility taxes, you can see down there in June, or excuse me, in FY20, the utility service tax was at 44%. We did collect 95% by the end of the year. So even though it's a little behind, we did make that up. And then the utility service tax on water was at 54, and we actually collected 103%. So I think we're actually doing pretty well on our forecasts. Any question on that?
Looks like communication services tax revenues are down a little bit. Is that?
Yeah, and we're anticipating that they will do a slow decline as that's tied into landline, and almost everybody now is cutting landlines or going to their cell phones.
Okay.
So I suspect that there'll be some national change on how that tax comes about. Would be my guess, but we're showing a slight decline in our forecast.
Okay.
And as you look at these charts, one thing I will bring to your attention is that they're based on 7/12 of a year, or 58.33%. So that's how the calculation of whether it's green or red. And you do know that many of these items are seasonal. So like ad valorem taxes, for example, we do not collect those evenly throughout the year. We get them almost all towards the winter time. So I'm not concerned about any of these red items, and I think we're doing well across the board.
We're only slightly more than halfway through the year. There's only, what, 42% of the year left?
Yep.
So.
The next slide is looking at all of the general fund cost centers, and all of them are in the green, which means that they're below 58%. That could be good or bad, depending on which way you look at it. But for our perspective, it means I think the directors are doing a good job of controlling costs. A lot of these, particularly like the police department, do a lot to vacant positions. So the actual expenditures are not as high as you would normally expect overall. In public works, that says 66% on that one, primarily for their encumbrances. They encumber most of the year out, for example, fuel expense. So that is not a concern. Same thing with legal services. They're right at the borderline. But I know Matt generally does a lot of booking of his expenses for outside legal services all in one bulk thing. And then down there, non-departmental, that particular one is where we have the COVID expenditures. And, COVID expenditures. We have about $50,000 in COVID, and the city manager search just concluded was at $26,100. That's what makes up the actual encumbrances of 75. So at some point, we will be coming back to council to appropriate monies to bring that particular department back up to at least above zero anyway. And I do know that there's a fire chief or a police chief research search going out, so we may want to use this same account and the same idea for that. Any questions on the cost center report? Okay. As far as the preliminary general fund forecast, we're looking at the same level of service as we did in the prior year. We do have items obligated in the previous year, such as union pay obligations, personnel hired, and partial year adjustments. We are continuing this year to budget at 100% of staffing. There is a staffing methodology that you could say we'll use a percent of full staffing, and the city manager and the budget team will be looking at that as a possible way to reduce some costs. But right now we're looking at 100% of all the positions.
What's been our typical vacancy rate?
What is that, Heather?
Citywide?
Yeah.
Citywide.
It's about 90.
15%-ish.
How much?
15%-ish.
More than we'd like.
What did you just say?
More than we would like.
Gotcha. Thank you, sir.
Sure. Fund balance recommendations, and then pending discussion in June. We'll talk about any kind of enhancement requests. Those were last year a la carte. It's the same thing, but we've identified those as enhancements. And also then the general fund CIP, that will be in the June CIP. We're not discussing that tonight. Okay,
I don't think we did last year, correct me if I'm wrong, did we do any one-time expenditures? Did we pay for any one-time expenditure in the millage rate? Or were all of our one-time
They were all in the
expenditure
317 fund.
were from our
Yeah, the
reserve?
general fund capital projects fund. It was about $2 million worth.
I thought so, I just wanted to confirm.
Any questions? Okay. The general fund revenue summary, did this as a comparison. You can see that FY20, we had taxes of 23 million. The actual was very close to that. The budget was 25 and 21, and we're looking at about 25.9 for FY22. Overall, you can see the total revenue budget in 20 was 42 million. That includes the 2.256 million from the CARES Act. So if you take that out, it would have been comparable to the FY20 budget as 39,785,000. So it's relatively flat. And then in FY21, we had the $2 million of general fund balance expenditures in the 317 fund, which was an increase to the budget. So if we take that out, we're at 41 million. And then in FY22, we're at 41 million point 8. So it's really relatively flat. There aren't any major increases except for those unusual events.
Scott, of the $874,000 that you have there in estimated increase, is most or all of that because of new construction?
No,
parcels?
new construction. I've got a slide on that a little later,
Okay.
Mayor. That
You know, I was going to
show
say, I
that.
thought I saw that in there somewhere else, but
That is based on about a 6%, an estimate of a 6% increase in property values over the prior year, and at the
Okay.
same millage rate. And this one also includes about $110,000 of pass-through specialty pay for the fire and police, and so that's really not usable income. It comes in and goes right back out.
gotcha. So basically, this isn't, is maintaining the millage rate, not necessarily a rolled back rate. If we maintain the millage rate, which would, you're saying, is estimated right now until you have the number at roughly 6% more. So we'd be 6% above rollback to
No,
achieve
it's
the.
a 6% increase in property values.
Okay.
Big difference.
I'm not, and
Because they
I
haven't
want to make sure I follow you.
Right.
Because.
So if we've had the taxable value of $1 million, this
Mhm.
year it'll be $1.6 million
Okay.
because of the increase in what the property appraiser says the values are.
Okay. But then with that increase, and maintaining the rate the same, have we got any idea what it would take to get us to roll back?
That number we should get tomorrow.
Okay.
They're calculating that. I can't remember, it was an estimate today and I didn't write it down.
So roughly around 6% on Port Orange was 6%.
Actually, a little under 6%.
Well, I thought we'd be better than that. I know
So
that there's
did
some
I.
communities that.
I thought I would be in conservative.
Some of the areas
It's-
that in the double digits. I think New Smyrna was in the double digits, weren't they?
I didn't see that. This just came in just before the meeting.
Okay,
the
I
property values.
saw some earlier estimates that Mr. Bartlett had sent out on the different cities.
Mhm.
I know he was previewing that ahead of his presentation next Friday. So I guess we'll all find out for sure then.
We do too.
Scott, just to clarify the example you just gave, if you have $1 million in taxable value and it increases by 6%, it's not $1.6 million, it's $1,060,000, right? 6%.
On $1 million?
Right.
Yes.
Yeah,
Okay,
60,000.
right.
107, yeah, $1 million.
Yeah, yeah.
$1 million.
Yeah, you said 1 point, you
I
had said
did,
$1.6 million, I'm like.
60%, no,
Whoa.
not 60%.
Boy, that'd be nice. Magic money.
Yeah.
Good catch.
$1.6 million. Good catch, Scott.
This is just another graph of the same thing. This is one showing the tax components. You can see in the ad valorem there it was up 692, and the other 110,000 was in the little red box there. But for the most part, we're forecasting pretty much the same as last year. Not much change. We okay? Same information, just a different graphical. This is from last year, the breakout of the taxable, non-taxable, residential, commercial. Interesting, we have about 67% of our property values are in residential, 21% in commercial, and 11% in the other. It's interesting to note that the residential is 25.2% of the assessed value, and commercial is only 2.3. So you can see the taxable value of the residential homes is very significant to the city. One thing that was pointed out to me earlier is that there are exemptions under commercial, and we had a question on that. And in talking with the property appraiser, there is a 10% cap on the commercial value increase that they can't go more than, and so those are considered exemptions under this particular format. And and I think I sent you the Port Orange University 101 class that I did last year, and there were a couple graphs in there that showed how the trend of ad valorem tax is over all the taxes, and it's been increasing. It's up in the 60% now. So it is going to be an increasingly important value as our residential properties get to the point where there are not going to be as many in the city. Yes, sir.
Can you explain that again? The 10% cap is the way I understand it is, so the property value on the commercial lot is increased higher than 10%, but the taxable value will
Be
halt
only at 10%.
At 10%.
Same with our residential exemptions. It's it's limited by law at 3% for the
3%,
cost of living, whichever is lower. And we have about 60% of our residential homes that have exemptions on them. So if you
So
see
what's the
6%,
percentage on the
Say again?
residential? What's the percentage on the residential that has?
About 60% have
60%?
exemptions.
I thought that was higher too.
And what that means is even though we get a 6% increase in the property values overall, we can't really apply that directly to it because
Right.
the taxable value is less. The just value, the market value will show that 6%, but the actual taxable value won't show that same 6% necessarily.
I would have thought our homestead exemption rate on properties, residential properties, would have been higher. Does that, in the number of residents, does that also include multifamily residents?
I
Or
believe
does that
it
go
does,
into
Mayor.
commercial?
They're based on parcels, and I believe those parcels are including the multifamily.
That would do it then. Okay.
Any other questions on that? Now the slide you've been waiting for. This just in, we had a $330 million increase in our just value or marketable values, 5.61% increase. And the taxable value had a $220 million increase for 5.83. And new construction, we added $8 million of new construction, 14.8% increase.
I just gotta turn it on. Get the screen to work, 'cause sometimes you can keep going.
Okay.
I'm good. Sorry about that.
So I'd like to turn over now to Jamie to talk about the compensation.
Back one slide on that for just a
Oh,
second.
sure. Do you want to go back to that one?
Yeah, thank you.
And I will have Robin send this slide to you, so you'll have that
All right.
information.
I appreciate that.
Thanks,
Okay.
Sarah.
Jamie?
Look at that.
Mayor and Council, Jamie Miller. Pleasure to be before you tonight. So this portion of the discussion is, well, tonight's as a whole is to set some framework and information that we need to consider as we establish the budget for this current year. So that is the purpose of this portion, is to provide you some framework. This is not asking you to provide negotiation direction up at the dais. We do have a shade meeting, but to provide you some information that you may want to consider going forward. So tonight, we have it labeled as a compensation discussion, but it is going to focus on the increase to $15 an hour. So with that in mind, there are obviously other compensation discussions that will occur throughout the year, but this purpose tonight is to focus on the $15 an hour change. So for example, our sworn police officers are all above the $15 an hour increase. So as we discuss implications tonight, it would not impact that unit. So I'm going to start off talking a little bit about some framing of what our workforce currently looks at, talk about the legislation, what we're required to do at a minimum, other compensation factors we consider, and then end by providing you some estimates of what some numbers could look like. So our current employment data. You can see here, if we were to be fully staffed, we would be a complement of just under 500 employees. That includes both part-time and full-time employees, but we are at about 40% vacant positions, so just about 10% currently. Of note, 10 of those 40 vacancies right now are maintenance workers. So that is a very challenging position that we're seeing. For those labor positions are definitely a challenge for us to fill. It's not our only challenging one, but that is about half of the maintenance worker slots that we are authorized, just under half of what we're authorized citywide. So just to give you an idea of some of the challenges that we're seeing with our current staffing levels. Our average year of service is about 8.5 years, but 14% of our current employees have less than 1 year of service on the job with the organization. 75% of our employees are covered by a union. And the reason I bring that forward tonight as an important information for you to keep in mind is wages are a mandatory subject of bargaining. So we're going to set some framework, have some discussion. However, at the end of the day, we're going to have to work with our union partners on what any type of implementation plan would look like. Approximately 20% of our staff currently are in positions, are in lower than $15 an hour. And for reference, our total personnel budget last year, and not just general fund, I know you've heard some numbers earlier about general fund, but total across all funds is approximately $40 million. So when we look at how we currently pay people, and I'm going to focus in on our NAGE and non-union pay scales because they cover the largest group of people. Our current pay scale starts at $9.80 an hour. For our full-time positions, it would be for $10.48 an hour. The way we take positions is we will cluster them based on relevant experience, education requirement, skill level, and try to take positions and put them together in similar buckets. And then each bucket, as it becomes more complex, is about 7% difference between one bucket to the next. And I'm providing you all of that information as we get later in the discussion. It will become relevant. So I'm trying to provide you a little bit of base level knowledge of how we currently structure our information. So let's take a look at the situation before us. This here is the ballot language that was voted on in 2020 and supported by both Volusia County and statewide that will require the increase of a minimum wage from $8.56 that it currently is up to $15 an hour over a 5-year period. You can see once we accomplish $15 an hour, there will be additional inflation increases that is planned. You can see on the ballot language here, it goes on to discuss the impact that we will see at state and local government costs. And these aren't a surprise that these are some of the challenges that we ourselves are facing. So you will see that it discusses that our attempts to mitigate these costs will unlikely produce material savings. And these changes will likely result in either higher taxes or possibly a loss of government services. So those are the discussions that we're having at the management level, is how do we adjust this change that's been voted in a way that is responsive to both our citizens in a responsible manner and addressing the compensation issues.
Quick question, Jamie,
Yes, sir.
to backtrack the previous slide on your current number of vacancies. I was curious if we could have that broken down by department.
Yes, I can get you that.
And just for conversation purposes, folks watching at home, you mentioned earlier that police is not included in this.
So
Police
police
and
is
fire.
included in the number of vacancies, but as we
This
start to
one?
discuss, yes.
Okay,
So
all right.
I
So it's
believe
all
we are at
departments are in
7
this.
police officer vacancies at this time.
Okay, so all departments are included in that 40?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
As we discuss changes in cost for future implementation, they would not be impacted in those numbers. So what are we required to do this year? I wanted to make sure to cover that first before we have some additional conversation. So you can see the way this is spread out. It shows you that what you are going to be required to have the minimum wage meet currently. So it starts at $10 effective September of this year and will increase $1 per year after that. Also this year, we have already contractually negotiated a 3% increase with our NAGE unit. That is estimated to be an approximate cost of about $560,000 total compensation cost, wage and benefits for those units. This does not include any adjustments to police and fire, which we do have open contract negotiations with this year.
How many of our employees are members of NAGE?
Oh, I have that. Let's see. We have 203 of our employees are covered by NAGE. About 45% of your employees are covered by the NAGE unit. So this is what we have on the books that we're required to do this year. If I take a look to say the legislation will allow us 5 years to get to 15, we know that under legislation minimum requirements, but what would that take? What would that look like if we wanted to get everybody to $15 an hour? So all of our current fire and police are over the $10 that we're required to do this year. However, our fire is not over the $15 mark, nor is a number of our NAGE employees. So to bring all of our fire and rescue employees up to $15 an hour, that would be approximately $190,000 in cost. However, I would note that that would leave 24 of our approximate 55 employees at $15 an hour. This would include employees in both the rank of firefighter and driver engineer, and employees ranging from 0 to 7 years of service. As we look at our NAGE and non-union employees, the cost to bring them up to $15 an hour without doing any further adjustments would be about $550,000. This does not include the 3% that you've already agreed to contractually across the board. And that would bring employees up to 117 of them at the same rate. And that would range from employees from 0 to 15 years of service sitting at the same rate of pay. So this is a complex puzzle with a lot of moving parts, and it is going to be expensive, but as you can see, getting to 15 is not necessarily going to be the challenging part. It's what are we going to do with everything that impacts. So you can see as an illustration of the concerns this causes is across the top line here, you see that our grades are currently evenly spaced out, starting at 10, going all the way up to 30, where the city manager is. We have approximately 7 grades that start at below $15 an hour. And to give you an illustration, the custodian, the maintenance worker, the equipment operator, and the crew chief are all in grades that start below $15 an hour. When we create this change, you're going to squish everybody up on top of each other. So bringing people up to 15 isn't the difficult part to figure it out. It's what do we do after that? So I do have, as an example, a crew chief currently with 7 years of service making $15.15 an hour. So you can see as we make these changes, if we were to bring a brand new maintenance worker in at $15, which they would be supervising, some of the concerns that organizationally we have to consider there. So compensation, it's not a perfect science. It's really not. If it was A plus B equals C, everybody would not be struggling to figure out where we're going to go from here. It is a balance between figuring out how to not only recruit talent, but to retain talent. Turnover does cost money. Depending on what article you're going to read, they're going to tell you that it costs anywhere from 30 to, I've even seen articles that say at the CEO level, 213% of their salary. So there is a lot of cost that goes into turnover that we have to be mindful of. So we consider a lot of things. We talked about position classification, whether they're sitting on top of each other, what's required of the job, how long somebody's been here. We have to also keep in mind the market. So we are not starting from the most market aggressive point. We are middle to low in our current market, and it is a rapidly changing market. So we have to be mindful of that. Daytona Beach is already at $15 an hour. Discussions, we've discussed with all the city managers around Volusia County what their plans are. New Smyrna Beach does plan to be at 15 this year. And general consensus is the plan to take approximately 3 years to get to the 15 mark. And there is not any discussion at this point that they would cut benefits to get to that 15. So that's what the general market that we're hearing right now is looking like. So we put together some numbers for you. Again, these numbers are just to provide a framework. This is not an implementation plan. This is just to give you an idea of what the size of the item that we're about to solve is looking like. So we are discussing how to mitigate some of this. You heard Dr. Niels talk a little bit about budgeting for vacancy rates, discussing partial year implementation of pay increases. So we will try to evaluate ways that we can mitigate this cost, but it is going to be a significant impact to the budget. So to walk you through why we've provided some of these as examples, just to give you a framework, is you may look at it and go, why 1725? So currently our lowest paying position is just about 15% above the current minimum wage. This is just to give you an idea. If we wanted to keep that level at 15% above the minimum wage, keep the spread of positions, we've historically done about a 2% time and grade. In order to implement that in our current pay structure would be over $11 million. If we back that down to $15 an hour, you can see, and then $12.50, keeping that same methodology, you see the impacts there. Line 4 shows you, as a reminder, what we discussed earlier, what you're required minimally to do, which is the $10 an hour minimum wage and a 3% across the board for NAGE. And then the last option that we have in here just for discussion purposes is if we were to take the whole organization and provide a $1 an hour increase, kind of a lift and shift model, to give you an idea of what that would look like for a cost impact. So That does conclude my portion of presentation, but in summary, this is the legislation that we are faced to implement this year and in the next coming years that we anticipate will have a large impact on our budget. We will be monitoring the market, and I do believe that the market will likely dictate an implementation faster than 5 years. But this is framework that we wanted to provide for you as we establish our budget this year. So if there are no questions on that, I can turn it over to Dr. Niels, or I'm here to answer anything that you may have.
Council, anyone? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jimmy.
Thanks, Jamie.
Mayor and Council, just to put that into perspective of what those costs are, each mill is about 3.5 million. So if you have to go to 12 mil, you're almost doubling the tax rate. So it's not an easy discussion. Policy and balance recommendations. Based on the numbers we have right now, I'm estimating that we'll put about $800,000 to the bottom line in general fund balance this year. And on top of that is the CARES Act funding, $2.256 million. So I'm estimating the general fund balance to be about $17,500,000. And we are finishing up our audit that will be presented to council on June 15th. And so that, I don't think the numbers are going to change from there. If they do, it'll just be some minor changes. Looking at a little different perspective, you can see that 17.5 million, the 30% target at that rate's 11.7, so that provides about 5.7 million over your target. And in a percentage basis, that would be, I remember last year we were 37.5, this would bring it up to 44.8. But we have made some adjustments to that this year. So we started with the 17.5. We funded as a part of the budget 2.52 million general fund capital items. We've had other budget amendments of $1,038,000, and you just approved recently the rec center for 1.4 million. So the total adjustments are just under 4.8 million, or the estimated fund balance coming down to 12.7 million, or still 32.5%, which is over your 30% minimum. So some of the recommendations that I have, these are things that we've done in other cities that were, I think, very well received. Commit by resolution an amount for a disaster reserve. I know council's objective is to have enough fund balance to take care of an emergency. That percentage there is calculated, includes the unassigned and the assigned. So if we just put it in assigned or unassigned, then that's still calculated in your reserve. I would recommend putting a fixed amount in a separate committed by resolution. Council says we're putting aside X number of dollars for disaster reserve, and that's the only use for it unless council changes their mind. A commitment is by resolution, so council can always change that whenever they would like. I'm also recommending that council consider reducing the recommended minimum balance to 25 to 30% with this disaster reserve contingency from the current 30 to 35%. Just for your reference, GFOA recommends 2 months worth of operating expense, or for Port Orange that would be about $6.5 million. I think that's too low, but that's GFOA's recommendation.
Is for everybody. It's not saying, well, you get hurricanes and you don't.
That's across the board, yes, Mayor.
Yeah,
correct.
So that's why it doesn't work for us.
So that's the first recommendation. The second is that we establish an infrastructure investment fund. This could be your general fund capital projects fund 317. And the purpose of this then is to identify a fixed portion of funding each year rather than taking it out of fund balance. There are three different ways that we've looked at this. A portion of ad valorem, assigning some number. At our current rate, if it was 7/100 of a mil, we put about $250,000 a year into that fund balance. Second one is to put a fixed amount of each amount, let's say $250,000. The third way is to say, let's put whatever whatever our fund balance policy is, if it's 30% and we have 31%, take the whole 1% or a part of that 1% and put that in that investment fund. I'm recommending, and we've used in the past in other places, a combination of the ad valorem and percent. So if you have an ad valorem and you're doing really well elsewhere, you can have a little additional go into that infrastructure investment fund. One of the things that council would need to consider is what types of projects would be applicable for this money, and then what would be the project amount, say $300,000 or under. Primarily, this is for those little things that come up, so you don't have to take it out of fund balance all the time. You're pre-funding many of those items. And it seems to work really well for councils that you don't have to always tip back into fund balance. You've got a separate sinking fund set aside for those smaller capital items. And as far as the ranking, we're looking at the number one priority is for safety of people or property. Number two, losing money or it will cost more if deferred. Efficiency and effectiveness, and finally quality of life. And as an example, last year out of the 317 fund, council approved these expenditures. The City Hall HVAC was funded, safety of $300,000, Public Works fence replacement of $30,000, City Center tunnel design, which is also you approved the fixing of that, $20,000 for the design. Down under revitalization, $2,000. Resurface parking lots for facilities, $70,000, and finally the I-95 signage permit for $4,000. You can see we had a couple safeties, some lose money, effectiveness, and quality of life. So that's a recommendation on the use of that. An update on our hurricane status. We have just talked with Allison recently on May 6th. She received an IRMA update that the state has obligated $741,933 of IRMA money and another $41,000 for state money, or a total of $783,000, which is nice to see because we still have quite a bit coming out. But we will recognize that revenue if and when we receive it. Sometimes the state takes a long time to bring those funds in.
Especially, we're already looking back 4 to 5 years.
Yes, sir.
As it is. And talk about a need to keep decent reserves for emergencies. This is a classic example of why.
Yep.
Yeah.
The city's been very fortunate not have to go to the bank to borrow money, and many others have.
Adding even more to the cost.
Yep. So that concludes my recommendations part. Now I'd like to go give you an update on the American Rescue Plan Act of 21. It was enacted March 11th of 2021 with $350 billion for state and local governments. Had 4 eligible expenditures, and there's been a lot of conversation across the whole country about exactly what qualifies for each of these. The first one was for COVID-19 or negative economic impact, a premium pay for eligible workers, for government services to the extent of lost revenue, and that's a very complex, different calculation to do that. And finally, investments in water, sewer, and broadband infrastructure. In my opinion, it seems that that would be the best use of the city's money. We have significant needs, and you'll see in the capital improvement program that we present that there's certainly a lot more need than there is money available. So how much money did the city get of this? 9.991. And as I think council may be aware, on May 20th, we received 4.9 or almost $5 million of our first tranche. The second tranche will be received in about a year, according to current Treasury guidelines. And the plan was the allocation for Port Orange, and then the Treasury account was established. The request for funds was submitted May 12th. The mayor signed the documents on May 17th.
Electronically.
The Treasury did the review, and shortly after that, on May 20th, they issued the funding to the city. On June 1st, we're asking the council to ratify the mayor's signature. That's on the next agenda. And as far as what we can do with that money, it needs to be obligated by the end of 24 and spent by the end of 26, which is a little different than what was originally published. Everybody thought they had to have that done by the
Projects
2024.
wrapped originally.
And they're, you know, the issue of shovel ready and the time it takes to get a project of any major scale up and running.
Especially when we're all bidding against ourselves
That's
for the
correct.
same labor pool to get
That's
them done.
correct. And everything I can see right now points to increasing inflation And so that concerns me with our CIP. And I guess it's good for investment accounts, but as far as overall, everything's going up in cost. Plywood, for example, is up about 5 times. So as we are out there competing with things like that, it's very difficult to, the cost that we had estimated a year ago is not going to be the same cost that we have this year. So just something to keep in mind as we look at possibility of doing CIP projects this year or deferring it, may be a significant cost in deferral. Yes, sir.
Maybe you just said it and I didn't hear it. Did they confirm the wide variety of expenditures we're allowed to do? Are we able to do infrastructure projects?
That's the
with
last
this?
slide.
Hang on, and I'll
That's
address
coming
that
up,
on the next
okay.
slide. Thank you. sir.
Before you leave this slide real quick, sorry.
Yep.
Just curious, it says first tranche. Is there an amount of time we would expect to receive the rest of the money, the other 5 million off of this, or am I?
And a year from now.
A year from now.
Okay, I'm sorry, I didn't hear that then. Thank you.
Yeah, the states are getting all theirs in one big lump sum, but we're a metropolitan city, and that's kind of identified here. This was before we had the finalized. We were at 9.6 million, but somehow we got an extra 400,000, which is not bad. And I'm not exactly sure why. I know there's some initial confusion later on where there were cities and counties that were in a city that's also a county seat, and they each got double counted. And so I know they went back and reallocated those monies so that they only had one, and some of that helped us out anyway. I don't know exactly where that came from. But the allocations are based on, and you may wonder why some of these cities get more than we did. We're considered a metropolitan city because we're over 50,000 in population. Other ones that aren't over 50,000 in population may be getting more than we, but it's based on a CDBG formula that measures population, poverty, and housing instability.
I think Ormond Beach is happy to cash a check, but would take some exception to that. That was one of my observations when I was reading this Sunday night. The other was I asked the city manager when I need to write the proclamation out to welcome Palm Coast into Volusia County. But I know that was how the data was distributed to you.
So Councilman Tremont, to ask your question will be coming up here. We pulled out of what the GFOA has said as far as eligible uses. Water sewer infrastructure is certainly one of the major ones that we could use. And first bullet point there, it says building or upgrading facilities and transmission, distribution, and storage systems. And then constructing publicly owned treatment infrastructure, managing and treating stormwater or subsurface drainage water, facilitating water reuse, and securing publicly owned treatment works. Now that could include also broadband is one of the considerations we're looking at to help give better security to our water and sewer plants. So that may be a legitimate use. The other thing that we've done is I've asked Amanda to take a look at our whole CIP and identify those projects that are most likely grant funded, so that if we're going to get money from somebody else, let's not use our ARPA money for that. So hopefully try to spread out where that money is going to go. And hopefully by the CIP thing we'll have some information for you on estimated projects that we think for ARPA funding and which might be grant funding.
Do these have to operate with the grant funding process, if you will? Like, you know, we have to match certain funds for projects. So by taking some of these CARES Acts, if we did some infrastructure, are we allowed to play the whole bill with CARES Act dollars,
Yes.
or do we have to match?
The CARES Act is fully funded because it was based on the public safety or the fire salaries. It was a completely reimbursement, so that money's free and clear. ARPA's sort of the same way, but it still has some grant strings. There are significant reports that are required on a quarterly basis. Amanda will be preparing those reports for us. But for the most part, they say is retain substantial flexibility to identify those water and sewer infrastructure investments that are of the highest priority for their own communities. So they're giving us lots of flexibility there.
Wow.
And again, just to reemphasize the timing, this was a question from the Treasury on the FAQ, or frequently asked question. May construction on eligible water, sewer, or broadband infrastructure projects continue past December 31st, assuming funds have been obligated? The answer is yes, that they have to be obligated by 24, but spent by 26. And I
In
have
some
several
cases, depending on the project, I would think that they need to be obligated even sooner just because the amount of time it takes to complete certain
Correct.
projects.
So that the
Because
whole
that-
issue there is shovel ready, and so we'll not only be competing for products that we need to complete our construction things, but for the people doing the construction.
Yeah.
Because if everybody's got all this money, it's going to be, I'm guessing, a lot of seller's market.
Yep.
So that could drive up our costs significantly. I mean, even though we have the money, it may be a very tough competitive
So in
market.
that regard, it might push that $15 an hour competitively from a market standpoint even higher.
Well, that 15 is also something that's in the federal. If you have a federal grant or contract, you're required to do the $15 right off the bat. So if we have any federal contractors that are doing something for that they would be required to have that already in place. I do have some other slides here, but they're more for your information on the types of things that we're eligible for that. And I'd like to turn it over now to the city manager for any comments he might have, and then council discussion. Thank you.
I did want to summarize some of the positive stuff from this to begin with, that as you go back to the beginning of the presentation and look at the general fund to date, our revenue collected and our expenses are positive this year. So year to date, we're doing good in where we were compared to last year. We have a very healthy fund balance, and we have ARPA funds that are going to be available to us to do work. So there's a lot of positive in that part of the presentation as we move forward. Probably the biggest takeaway moving forward is that $15 an hour requirement that we're going to have to get to is a huge task for us to undertake. I think from a competitive standpoint, as you heard from Jamie, we are slightly below the midpoint in our compensation now in the general market, and the competitive, it's a buyer's market right now for people working. So there are going to be challenges. If we take 5 years to get to 15, we're probably going to fall farther behind in the market of hiring. So as we go forward, we're expecting most likely, and as you heard from the beginning, this is a setting expectations. We're not expecting you to tell us today exactly where to go. We are expecting to say we should probably get to 15 sooner than 5 years, possibly even 3. Given how most of the other communities are doing that in order to stay competitive. And we have not reached a point that I can say that's exactly what we're going to do, but we're at least trying to look into it under that. As you heard from what's expected to be Port Orange's future related to increases in property values and new construction, the dollar amount as we see that at the current tax rate would not cover a 3-year $15. And that's not including any of the other enhancements or anything that are in the budget. So going forward, the natural growth of our community through property tax increase and help me if I get off on the wrong way here, between the property taxes and the new construction is not likely to cover what it will cost us to do the $15 minimum
Gotcha.
wage. And that's at the current rate. That's not going to roll back. That's staying at current rates going forward. So that's something that's important to understand as we move forward in this. The other part of that with the healthy fund balance, Dr. Niels and I both had been in cities where some form of the general fund had been set aside for, those are reasonable, expected, legitimate capital expenses, fences, air conditioners, and replacements. And I think from a standpoint of a deliberate way to fund your general fund improvements, that method is better than, hey, at the end of the year, let's see what we got left in the fund balance and throw a list of 20 projects and pick the ones you want. So the reason for that being put there, and he does the very good technical and I'll do the regular guy explanation, is I do think from a standpoint of if we know there's a certain funding set aside, we know air conditioners are going to break, we know we've got to do these things, we can methodically bring them to you in a more deliberate fashion instead of it being a pick things at the end of the year. So I think what he has presented is a stable model to use. We need the savings account there to cover us for the hurricanes, but we're above the amount necessary for that, and this is a very positive, deliberate, proactive way to handle your general fund expenses. Basically a bigger version of what we do with fleet computers now. You know these are going to happen. This is just setting aside funds so that you are able to pay those in a thoughtful manner as you go forward. So any feedback that you want to provide us on that, we'd be happy to have, but that was my summary of the presentation.
I'd make one addition to that, is that we probably really need a sinking fund for facilities as well, and prepay some of that. There's a lot of roofs that need to be replaced, and those are fairly major expenses when they come up. So as we have for fleet, as we have for IT and all those things, we have money set aside, and we can charge back the user departments on that to reimburse that fund. But I think as you're looking at where we want to set aside money, I think that's another area to consider.
Wayne, I'd certainly like if you could take a look at the recommendations that you guys have put together. Before we meet again to discuss those, I'd certainly like some sort of memo from you detailing what your thoughts are on those and what the impact would be. I'd like you to hear from you, examine that in memo form, so that we have something to read and chew on before we discuss it again. I don't want to just go back and forth, all of us. I want to make sure that we're all getting the same thing from you, and then we can come back and discuss that again. I think that there are certainly, in my opinion, legitimate reasons for doing all of those things. But let's face it, the legitimate reasons for doing all those things also have a cost with a lot going on. So maybe there's something in that where you recommend phasing that in as well, doing those sinking funds, which is the most important, least important, over the next 3 years. I don't know, maybe you guys can examine that. Scott, I'm sure that you've got a unique insight. You and Wayne can discuss that, and then I think we'd be all interested to hear and that what your feedback is. We'll digest it, and then we can discuss it again. Let's start with Scott.
Why do you want to start with me?
What? Why?
Is that why you want to start with
Why
me?
you want to start with him?
Because you usually say it all, we don't have to.
Right.
Well,
We don't have to comment after
For
that.
sure, right?
well, maybe it's just the rest of us want to be lazy and let you carry.
Yeah, well, there's
Well, we can start with Jonathan.
that's what can I make a motion for that?
Second.
Wait a minute, I
It's
go
a
first a
workshop.
lot over here, okay?
So, it's a lot to digest,
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
it wasn't that long ago that any of us sitting up here didn't see any of this coming, right? I mean,
Right.
the voters hadn't increased minimum wage, there hadn't been a global pandemic, so there's a lot of things that, when we were forecasting 3-4 years ago, that we're not even talking about the same discussion any longer. So it's pretty challenging. Just some thoughts to share, because we're far from figuring out what the plan and the play is, but the voters mandated this, so for as far as like the minimum wage increase. So whether you agree with it, you don't agree with it, that's neither here nor there. We've got to get there. But like Jamie spoke of very well, there's a lot of things that are going to be involved in that the voters didn't mandate. Voters didn't vote to address compression at the same time. They just didn't, right? And so, and all the things that are going to go along with that, and chasing the private sector and competing for jobs and all those different things, those aren't things that had anything to do with checking yes or no on that ballot issue. But they are definitely things that we're going to have to address. We're going to have a plan. I think it would be foolish for anybody to think that all of it's going to get perfectly fixed and laid out all in one budget year. It's not. I think you're probably going to see the impacts of this over 10 years
Yes.
or longer. And there will be some cities that will struggle immensely with this. When you look at some of these numbers and some of these mandates, and we kind of know where some of these cities sit with their millage already, and they're already near capped out on what they can do with that. I don't know what they're going to do. I don't know how they're going to get there unless the state starts changing the millage caps, right? So it's a lot to digest. The one thing that I do think, we need to come up with a good plan, but there's going to have to be flexibility in the plan, because we don't know what next year brings. We don't know what 2 years out. It's easy to say, you know, let's phase this in incrementally, and you just pick percentages and you go, okay, over the next 5 years, here's how we get to there. Well, we all know, every one of us sitting in this room, that there's going to be something that throws a wrench into that plan within the next 5 years. It's just inevitable, right? So we just don't know what that's going to be, and it could be a lot of wrenches. But we're going to have to come up with a plan, and we're going to have to come up with a plan that's flexible. We're going to have to come up with a plan that puts our city in a competitive process. You know, I know we talk a little bit about the dollar an hour competitiveness, but the other side of that is that employees that work in the government sector also typically have pretty good benefit packages that accompany their wages and things like that. So, you know, I don't know that you're competing completely apples to apples with somebody that's in a labor position that makes $15 an hour and has no benefits versus somebody that's working in a municipality making $15 an hour and has, you know, health care and paid leave and all the other benefits there too. But it's all part of the discussion, and we're going to have to figure it out. Is it going to be perfect in the first couple of years? No, I don't see how that's going to get there. But it will be something that we're going to have to be mindful of, and we're going to have to keep working at it. We're going to have a good plan, but it will be a difficult plan. And some of this may be us, you know, seeing what other cities are doing. You know, I mean, this may be something regionally where we're all looking at, okay, well, what are the cities in Brevard and Volusia and Flagler and, you know, such doing, and how are they getting there, and maybe other ideas will come out and plans and things like that. And again, some cities are going to be able to do more right away, and some cities may be able to do more down the road. I don't know. It's a challenging time to be a new city manager. I'll say that.
Yes, it is.
I'm still glad to be here.
You know, with the ARPA funds,
Can't change your mind.
Absolutely not.
Right? The ARPA funds. So one of the things I was sitting here thinking about was, so using this funding, you know, and this is for staff, right? This is not really for council, because staff's going to have to come back and say, well, here's what we think you could do for that. But I think it would be really good for us to be able to show and figure a plan to utilize the ARPA funds that somehow project cost savings for our residents. You know, where can we do that? Are there projects where we can use those funds to complete projects that might keep some of their long-term utility costs, or even not long-term, but the utility costs over the next 5 years in check, keep them lower than maybe they would have been, and you know, and show that and see, you know, hey, here's some projects we think that will produce some savings, and the savings might just be your utility costs don't go up over the next few years or what have you, which is fine, but you know, kind of keep that in mind and be looking at that as a staff and bringing that back to council. And I think Scott kind of, you know, hinted to it a little bit also, is where can we get the biggest bang for our buck with those ARPA funds? Where can we bundle projects together for savings, match with some grant stuff or some things that are out there that may be able to do that. And we may already be a little bit ahead of that game, because one of the things that I think we've done pretty well as a city and a staff is we've got projects that are somewhat shovel ready or close to being shovel ready. So cities that are out there that are all of a sudden they've got this newfound money and they're not even close to doing that, they're not ready to go to bid. So we may not be fighting for that. So we may find some bright light there as well. So, but it's a lot. There's a lot of challenges, and I think the city manager and his staff, they're really going to have to give us a lot of paths to look at, and then collectively we'll figure out which path is the best. But you know, the one thing that needs to stay in the forefront of all of this is that this is a voter mandate. This is what the voters said they want to do, and Wayne's right. There's a cost for this, and that's hard to see because you don't see that on the ballots. But
Hey, actually, well, you didn't see the number, but the language was there.
yeah, to some degree.
It did say
Yeah.
municipal governments will see
Yeah,
cost
sure.
increases,
Right.
or reduction in services.
Right.
It was in the ballot language.
Yep.
People voted for it anyway.
Well,
So
you know,
Nobody
when you-
reads the fine print.
Yeah, when you break that down to what does that really mean, you know, that's,
it was there.
or to borrow to Bob Ford's expressions, the devil's in the details, right? So we don't know where those details lay yet, but we're going to figure that out.
Drew?
I don't like following him. 'Cause
Come on,
he-
man.
he-
You're
He
done.
speaks
Okay.
so good. No. Scott brought up a good point. Challenges. I see a ton of challenges out in front of everybody, and you know the path isn't clear. So statewide, it was roughly 6 out of 10 voters approved this, right? Just over 60%. So,
Had to be.
you know, I wonder how many of those thought of the implications of the increase in cost, goods, services, and all these things that have to happen to accommodate that. You know, you see it and it's spread out over 5 years, 6 years, but clearly we're going to have to get there sooner than that. Daytona's already there. You got private industry, Target, and a lot of these
It's not
places.
just government.
Yeah, a lot of these places are already at 15 an hour, and so we just have a world of challenges out in front of us that, you know, I'm looking at it, 2 to 3 years is we're going to have to be set and have a clear plan. We're already a little behind the 8 ball.
This is going to be a whole lot more than just paying $5 for
Yeah,
a Big Mac.
and so and so all these things, you know, taxes, everything, clothing, all these things, gasoline, lumber, all these things that are already going up, it's only going to skyrocket more. So are you going to be in a better position at $15 or $16? You know, nobody knows. Housing, all these things are going up, and you know, this, even if we went to 15 tomorrow, are you gonna, is that gonna provide enough to pay your bills? Clearly people are gonna, you know, people that aren't good with money or whatever are clearly gonna struggle, even at $15 an hour.
Well, that's a great discussion for people who are still in the workforce. What about all your residents that are already on fixed incomes?
Yeah.
Their fixed income's not going up.
Yeah, or it's going up,
25%
or it's
30%
going
or
up minutely,
Right.
and there's, you know, that part isn't going to be addressed, and that's, you know, they're not going to keep up with this. So, you know, what's going to happen to all of those? We just don't have a clue. I'm sure, you know, housing-wise,
This is our part of this world, but
people
it
are
is
gonna
much
lose,
larger than
you know,
us.
they have to live somewhere. People are going to lose houses or be. It's just going to be interesting to see where this takes everybody.
Well,
It's
we're
definitely
going
gonna be a
to
struggle.
find that out one
Oh,
way
yeah.
or the other. It's been
Sooner
voted on.
sooner rather than later.
But we need, for our part of it,
Yeah.
we need to manage our part of it.
Yep.
Good comments, both of you guys. That's what I like when you go first, Guy. You hit everything and you articulate it well because you're 100% right. You know, I've said before, time and again, it's very dangerous, very irresponsible to make policy decisions based on intention as opposed to the result. And that's what that's what we've seen here with the minimum wage law. And unfortunately, you know, people made that decision based on the intention, on how it felt. For them to think that they're doing something positive for people. But as we've known ever since 1930s, FDR first broke out the minimum wage laws. The law that was designed to help people has hurt the very people that it was designed to help. And I don't think this time will be any exception to that. I will always continue to be mindful of the pocketbooks of everybody while values may go up. It was just said a second ago, that does not mean incomes are going up. And many folks that are on fixed incomes, it's bad news for them when their housing values increase. So I will continue to be mindful of that. We have stormwater fees we're going to be reviewing in the next year or so. We have an expected trash pickup fee to likely increase. You know, there are a lot of other things that are going to be going into this. I'm going to continue I'll continue year after year to reject the idea that we have to pay more to maintain the service. I'd like to continue to challenge our staff to be as efficient as possible, find things that did not work last year and don't do it again. You know, whatever it takes, every business in the world has to figure out how to become more efficient while still providing a high quality product and service for their customer base. And I think the municipalities. We need to challenge ourselves to rise to that level of expectation as well. So, good presentation. I appreciate all the work on staff. These are going to be very difficult times. We've had some battles up here year after year, and I'm sure we will continue to do this still again. But there's not a better council that I would rather do that with, because, as I said, that I will always be mindful of the pocketbook of every taxpayer here. I believe this council does the same as well. So,
Jonathan?
I enjoy getting to follow everyone. Most of the points I've had got hit by multiple people there.
You don't realize that I'm doing this to be nice now.
Yeah.
Later on, when we have the actual votes on these things,
Yeah.
you vote first.
Hey, that's the way it's always been, isn't it? So.
And always will be.
There you go. No, I looking at this, what we have with this piece of legislation with Amendment 2, like it or not, it's here, it's passed. The language is the language, and we're going to have to deal with it just like every other business. I happen to have 2 storage units. I have a personal and I have one for my business. I keep just 2 small units. Both of them are going up by 25%. I got letters today for both units that they're going to be going up in cost. I had a phone call as well today with someone who owns a mobile detail business, and he was explaining to me how he's going to have to adjust his cost just to be able to cover the minimum wage for the other people that work for him. We have a challenge, as does the entire state of Florida now. Whether you own a business or whether you're sitting here operating a municipality, we're going to have to figure this out. And I think Scott said something very wise, is that, the best laid plans sometimes don't work out. We need to have a plan. We need to execute that to the best of our abilities, but we need to also be prepared for things to change. We don't know what we're going to run into over the next 12 months, but we have to work together to come to that plan. I think that the one thing we have to remember as well, and Chase alluded to this, is we have a variety of different incomes that we're dealing with that live within our city, and we have to respect all wallets. We have people who live on Social Security. They have very fixed incomes that they get, and when their housing values go up, it is not a good thing for them, especially if their taxes go up at the same time. And we have to be mindful of that. Costs are going to be going up everywhere for these people. It's not just going to be their taxes. You look at what you're paying at the gas pump. You look at what you're paying for materials. Anything you want to do. I don't care if you want to plant a little plant, tree, whatever, in your garden. It's going to cost more money this year than it did last year. So we're going to have a big challenge here. That's for sure. But it's a good presentation. It's very informative. I thought you guys gave us a lot of information in a really compact way. So good job by staff. Thanks.
Well, I tell you what, this is why we have these workshops early in the game, because that's a lot of information. The decisions are forthcoming. We have the capital improvement coming up, and there's a lot going on this year. So I'm glad. I think we're off to a good start informationally. Scott, I want to thank you and your staff. Appreciate you making sure that we're in the know. It made for some very dry but important Sunday night reading for me, but there's more to come. That's the nature of the beast.
I put a few pictures in there just for you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I noticed the red, yellow, and green in the graphics, so. And I was going to say.
Don't forget HR too, and the staff. They did a great job. I thank Jamie and her staff as well.
Okay.
Or Heather, Heather and her staff. Instead of Jamie.
Well, it was Heather that answered your question when you needed it. It wasn't Jamie, so absolutely. As we all know, it's a team effort. Did you have something else to add, Scott?
Yeah, I just wanted to, one last thing that I think maybe Wayne and his staff might be looking for direction from us is, and I just wanted to mention from my perspective, is that if we're looking at this minimum wage issue and how we're going to be dealing with that over the next few years, I would say that from my perspective, at least, when I look at stuff like this, as much as the pain is going to be there at some point anyway. I'm in favor of us trying to take the biggest bite of this early as opposed to late. I don't want to kick this can so far down the road that can grow so big that in a few years it's just a disastrous situation. And I think a lot of cities are taking that approach. I think it's the right approach. And it's going to be, there's going to be sticker shock when some of the folks throughout the state of Florida see their millage rates and their tax bills and all that. But it is what the voters voted for. But I do think that it is best for us to take that biggest bite early, and then hopefully that gets a little bit better over the years to come. So I don't know. I think maybe that's some direction that you guys are going to need from us, because there's a lot of different ways to get to that mandate, right? I mean, because at some point that's what we're looking at, is how do we comply with state statute now, right? So I just think that's some direction we're going to have to give.
Well, we're
staff.
putting a bow on it. We had
Yeah.
2 strong conversations tonight. One was $15 impact, $15 minimum wage raise impact on us, and the other was the possible establishment of certain sinking funds. And I think that those are the 2 things that we, particularly the sinking funds. I know that I asked you to address that in memo to us about how to step that out over time also. One thing that I've always espoused is that we examine all our fees a minimum of once every 5 years. And all that is going to play into this as we look at water and sewer and things like that. Because the last thing we ever want to do is, this is coming on us whether we want it or not. And this is going to have a heavy impact. We don't need we kept our water fees down for way too long, but now we're really going to hurt you, or anything else with any other fee for that matter. That's why we review them regularly. That's why we had a very difficult conversation a couple years ago over raising our sewage. I'm sorry, not our sewage, our drainage. We ended up raising it $15 instead of $20. Not a lot of money, but percentage-wise it was, and at the same, but it hadn't been done in over 20 years. If you have minor adjustments, minor tweaks, and things like that to keep up with the times, then it doesn't hurt people when you have to do it, because everybody's keeping up as well. This is not minor. This is not minor at all. Scott, I'm going to, for the purpose of conversation, say tonight that I agree that we're going to have to probably take the larger chunk up front. And I'm not saying that necessarily because I want to spend the money. I want to make sure that we have our city staffed. And from a competitive standpoint, it might not be 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 over 3 years. It might be half, 1/6, 1/6. It might be any number of things. But we need to stay ahead of the competitive edge. I don't want us going beyond what we need to do, but we can't have vacancy rates in some of the departments like we have right now.
I'd like to see multiple options. I want to see that, the big chunk. I'd like to see what it looks like broken down over time as well, just to give us a couple different flavors to look at.
And I'd like to see something that just really focuses on addressing the compression issue more than anything else. That makes sure that we are retaining the people who already have been onboarded and that are already working for our city.
That is probably going to be the hardest part, because that's not something we can ascertain up front, but it's something we need to address as we go.
And that may cause us to have a big chunk every year, because you gotta.
That's why Scott said
Well,
maybe it might
yeah.
take 10 years to sort this out.
Yeah,
That's exactly
if
why.
we lag
Well,
behind,
this
we're going to
could-
lose good employees to other agencies that are paying a little bit more for the same job or whatever. So that's going to affect us pretty
I
darn
thought-
quickly.
I think another thing's interesting at the end of workshops, when I'm thinking I'm about to drop the gavel, sometimes that's when we have our best discussion. With that, anything else come before us this evening? There being none?
Thank you,
Scott,
Mayor
thank you very
Council.
much. Everybody else, thank you very much.
Thanks, Steph.
Appreciate y'all. Have a good night.